Hello and welcome to the program. Ukraine extended sanctions against Russia. All those involved in the act of aggression against Ukraine in the Kerch Strait were included on the list. Now, the Ukrainian sanctions were synchronized with sanctions of the EU and the US against the Russian Federation. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Ivan Us. He's head consultant at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So as for now, among those included on the sanction list are persons involved in the construction of the Kerch Bridge, the seizure of a Ukrainian vessel in the Black Sea. And so it adds up to now 294 legal entities and 848 persons on the list. That's a lot. But why adding those people who were on the Kerch Strait, who might not, being directly influenced by the sanctions? Like I'm thinking families of special forces, Russian special forces and stuff like that. What's the influence there?
So actually, starting from the beginning, from the 2014, when the conflict starts, the Western world, first of all, the United States of America and the European Union decided that the main response to Russia will be policy of sanctions. Initially, as of 2014, the main statement was as follows, that sanctions could give either immediate effect, that has not happened, as we saw, or it give effect in future. As we saw the history of Iran and sanctions and talks about the nuclear program, they required 13 years, but it's Iran. Russia is even bigger than Iran, and that's the problem, that they have more argument to survive, they have more connections, and they have more options how to go beyond sanctions. So how to avoid when they, on the one hand, they exist, on the other search ways due to some offshore structure, due to some other elements, how to avoid those moments. Nevertheless, as the main decision was made in favor of the policy of sanctions, first of all, the United States of America and, of course, European Union too, decided to constantly refresh those sanctions, search new arguments. It's not only conflict in Ukraine. We should understand that currently, if you look at the policy of sanctions, I mean, first of all, Western policy, those sanctions put on for Russia influence to elections, both in the United States of America and in the European Union. Russia interference in those elections. Russia did in Syria, because Russia placed against the Western world in Syria. Another moments, the last case, it's with attempt of Russia to murder Skripal in London, that actually in the United Kingdom, because it's Salisbury, yes, because actually the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom accused Russia in actually chemical attack of the state. Russia,
are strong words.
Yes, a very strong word, because actually it's demonstrate the attitude of the UK government to Russia. And actually the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Boris Johnson, while giving an interview to Russian journalist, ironically the daughter of Mr. Nemtsov, who was murdered near to Kremlin, practically behind Kremlin wall, he said that we sure that it's Russia, and the question whether you have some evidence, he said we will find them. At this moment, it don't matter, because we're sure. So, but returning to your question, of course, now this new way of sanctions, of course, it seems like some argument happened. It was the case formally in Kerch Strait, and that's led to a new way of sanctions. But it's, first of all, it's demonstration to Russia that there will be no change of this policy.
But
because
that's the continuity of a certain policy. And about that, like, what's interesting here is that the recent Ukrainian sanctions were synchronized with the sanctions of the EU and the US against the Russian Federation. What does this synchronization mean, and why is it important to have, all these different power and different countries and size together at the same time putting the sanctions?
Yes, so the main reason is to demonstrate to Russia that that is a position of not only Ukraine or not only USA or not only Canada, because Canada so plays an active role in sanctions policy versus Russia, that it is a position of so-called West. So all Western countries, that they decided that we put sanctions, and that the accident that took place irritate not only Ukraine, it's irritate Western world. Because frankly speaking, a lot of experts in the Western world said that those situations in Crimea, in Kerch Strait, shows the attempt of Russia to monopolize control over the sea. So it's not only about Ukraine and Russia relationship, it's about attempt of one country to start demonstrate to the whole world that if they want, they can control one sea. And some experts expressed the threat that the next sea that Russia tried to control will be the Black Sea. That's why Turkey, of course, has a lot of things that can said about that, because they, of course, will be angry, and especially taking into account the history of Russia and Turkish relationship. Because on the one hand,
complicated.
Yes, it's extremely complicated. Because on the one hand, sometimes Turkish leaders demonstrate positive attitude to Russia and demonstrates their readiness to cooperate with Russia. On the other hand, we remember the situation when Turkish soldiers shot down Russian airplane, and they demonstrated that it's happened not by accidentally, it's happened by purpose. They want to do that.
So would you say that there is a possibility if, let's say, Russia and the Russian fleet goes too far, and like from the Azov Sea and to the Black Sea, and there is an, I wouldn't say open conflict, but at the very least some clashes between Turkish fleet and the Russian fleet. Would you say that kind of thing could happen, and how would it play really, and does really Russia has to benefit from the situation? Because obviously it would, it would have like a huge problem with Turkey against there.
Absolutely, because now we see that Western world is not ready for a direct conflict. As the best example of the same situation actually was the year 2008, when Russia attacked Georgia, and USA actually sent its troops. That's something that didn't happen at this moment. The fact, the famous call of that time President of the United States of America, Mr. Bush, so the President of the Georgia, that time President of Georgia, Saakashvili. Yes, and when Saakashvili was asked by Bush how he do actually, Saakashvili said how I could do it if Russian soldiers stays 300 kilometers over Tbilisi. And Bush said to him, nothing will happen because you remember that I sent a ship with humanitarian support. He said, yes, of course. And Bush said that there is no humanitarian support in the ship. There's USA soldiers, and if Russia decides to attack Tbilisi, those soldiers receive an order to attack Russia, and that will be Third World War, the next World War, because it's hard to count, because the Cold War was like a sort. So, nevertheless, on the one hand, Western countries now is not ready for military conflict, and we see that. On the other hand, Turkey demonstrates that actually they could go to military conflict. Actually, they did that when they shut down Russian airplane. The other fact that Russia analyzed that in case of their response to Turkey, because 30 or 40 years ago, it was a conflict between the Soviet Union and Turkey, and Mr. Gromyko, at that time Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, said that several our rockets can eliminate the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Strait to a big sea. So if Turkey will close way to our ships. Because now the main argument that Turkey can use against Russia, that they could close those two straits. It's situated on the
because they're more powerful than Russia on that matter. And now, so that kind of move could isolate Russia from Turkey. But on the other hand, and I want to come back to a recent event in the news, when a more symbolic event, when Poland refused or didn't hand and refused to have Russia assist to the commemoration of the beginning of World War II, of the 80th commemoration of World War II. It is kind of humiliating for a Russian leader not to be invited to such commemorations. Would you say that that kind of symbolic act is more important than sanctions, or does it work pair in pair, or does that have the same kind of effect? here?
Actually, so that's a fact, because Russia is a country that lives by its history. They like to talk about the victory at the Second World War and the big role of Russia. They like to talk about the fact that Gagarin was the first person in the space. That's why for them the main achievements was in the past, not in the present. And that is the problem of Russia. As for the Second World War, for them it's emotionally a very important moment. But Russia likes to show history from their side. And when Poland made a statement that Russia will not be, Poland, of course, driving in the fact that actually formally at the 1st of September, Germany attacks Poland, at the 3rd of September, the Second World War starts. But it's very important that the attack of Germany to Poland was absolutely coordinated with the Soviet Union. Yes, it was a famous Molotov and Ribbentrop deal. And while we always say that Germany attacks Poland, but we forgot that at the same moment the Soviet Union attacked Poland from the other side. And actually the current Baltic states and some part of Ukraine that at that moment was under Poland appears under the control of the Soviet Union. And then, after the victory of the Second World War, the Soviet Union tried to do their best to explain to everyone that it's a fault. Yes, rewrite history, because I always ask the question, from the Second World War started the year of 1939. From 1939 till 1941, on what side Soviet Union plays? Taking into account that 80% of the USSR export goes to Germany as of May 1941.
Now I want to come back to the symbol, because basically it shows, as we talked about earlier, there is this unity between the West. So towards the sanction, there is this unity towards history. Everybody agrees, on Poland's decision. But now I want to switch to Europe, because there's going to be soon European elections.
Yes.
Which is quite important for Europe and for the future of Europe. There's going to be elections in Ukraine, which is a turning point in Ukraine. How to ensure, and to conclude this interview, how to ensure that the sanctions and the West stays united despite, well, what could be efforts for Russia to undermine its unity?
Of course, Russia does their best to eliminate this unity of West. Of course, Russia has a lot of expectation for those elections, dreaming that anti-European forces, or at least not the parties that support those sanctions, that the enemies of the parties, like we know in Italy, there are a lot of opponents in Hungary. Yes, that all those parties fail to win. That's why it's really very important, and there is a risk at this moment. Of course, I couldn't say that I'm sure that the pro-Western powers lose this election. I think that the pro-European project is still alive, and it was a very good article written by Mr. Macron and published in the 28 countries. First of all, it was directed to the United Kingdom, because while talking about the election in Ukraine and the election in the EU, yes, we should take into account that the Brexit was expected, but whether it will be just several hours to those events, we're not sure. Furthermore, probably it will not be. There is such a feeling, and now I'm ready even to make mistake that there will be no Brexit, at least on this week.
Well, that will.
Yes.
That.
So it could be after, but nevertheless, all those factors, of course, they are negatively influenced on the future of Europe, because if we talk about the European Union as a project Europe, yes, project of united Europe, project that actually appears after the Second World War. The Second World War was a reason, because first of all, in Germany and France, I understand that without those unity, it will be the third, the fourth, the fifth, and so on.
For peace, indeed.
Yes, world wars, because territorial claims. They exist between many countries. They exist between Germany and France. They could exist between, theoretically, inside Spain, as we see. So some other countries, theoretically. So that's why those unity of Europe, first of all, important for preserving peace on the continent. And the step that was made after the famous deal of coal and steel as of 1951, that was the first stage of the future European Union. The fact that there was no conflict in the European continent, I mean in the center, because of course there was war in the Balkans, means that it gives its results. And furthermore, if the Balkan countries at that time were members of European project, I'm more than sure that it could not be war. Of course, history doesn't know the second version.
Well, we can't rewrite history, but like basically, and to conclude this interview, let's say it's important that Europe keeps its unity and continues to basically avoid any conflict with could be a world war conflict.
Absolutely, of course, Europe dream not to have this conflict. That's why they make their stake on sanctions. Whether those sanctions give the results is a lot of experts has its own views, but let's look only on the Russian reserves. Russia has 2 funds as of beginning of the conflict. Now they have 1 fund, the Prosperity of Nation. And this fund, Prosperity of Nation, as of the beginning of the conflict, they have $77 billion. As of the 1st of March, it's $59 billion, and there is no the second fund. And I actually remember a moment when those 2 funds was united, saying that it will be a large fund. So now that fund 59, while before united was 77. It's a demonstration of the results of those sanctions, because the Russian economy losing. Russia now thinking about ways of actually giving the Kurila Islands to Japan, actually selling those islands, and that result of sanctions.
Says a lot. Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in studio today.
Thank you for the invitation.
That was Ivan Os, head consultant at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.